At 11:32 on the morning of November 29, 1943, Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran knelt in the tail section of a B-17 flying fortress named Tikitavi. Watching German fighters swarm toward his bomber like angry hornets. 19 years old, a farm boy from Wisconsin, Moran was on his first combat mission over a heavily defended target. That morning, the 8th Air Force had sent over 300 bombers to destroy Bremen's factories, and German defenders had already shot down 6 flying fortresses in the first hour. Moran's position was the loneliest on the aircraft. The tail gunner sat on a bicycle-style seat at the very back of the bomber, separated from the rest of the crew by 40 feet of fuselage. His only company was a pair of .50 caliber machine guns and the German fighters trying to kill him. The B-17 carried 10 men. The pilot and co-pilot in the cockpit, the navigator and bombardier and the nose flight engineer and the top turret radio operator behind the bomb. Bay 2 waist gunners at open windows, a ball turret gunner hanging beneath the aircraft in a glass sphere, and Moran alone in the tail. The tail gunner's job was simple in theory. Protect the bomber's most vulnerable angle. German pilots had learned early in the war that attacking from directly behind a B-17 put them in the firing arc of only one man, the tail gunner. By November 1943, the 8th Air Force was losing bombers at a catastrophic rate. The mission to Schweinfurt 2 months earlier had cost 60 flying fortresses in a single day, 600 men killed or captured in one afternoon. Bomber crews called deep missions into Germany, milk runs to hell. The mathematics of survival were brutal. A bomber crew had to complete 25 missions to go home, but statistical analysis showed the average crew lasted just 15 missions. Some groups lost half their aircraft every month. Moran had enlisted the day he turned 18. Growing up on a dairy farm near Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, he had watched aircraft pass overhead and dreamed of flying. The Army Air Forces needed gunners, young men with quick reflexes and steady nerves. Farm boys who knew how to shoot were ideal. Gunnery training taught him to track fast-moving targets while compensating for wind, altitude, and the speed of his own aircraft. He learned to fire in short bursts to prevent the barrels from overheating. He memorized the silhouettes of German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf 109, Fkulf 190. He could identify them at 2,000 yards, but training could not prepare anyone for the reality of combat over Germany. The cold at 24,000 feet dropped to 40 below zero. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. The thin air made every movement exhausting. German fighters came in waves, firing 20mm cannons that could tear through aluminum like paper. Tikitavi had taken off from Snetterton Heath in England as part of the 96th Bomb Group. The target was Bremen, an industrial city on the Weser River, with shipyards, aircraft factories, and submarine pens, one of the most heavily defended cities in Germany. The bomber formations crossed the North Sea in tight defensive boxes, each B-17 positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. The theory was simple. Pack the bombers close together so their combined firepower could drive off enemy fighters. The reality was brutal. A direct hit on one aircraft often damaged those flying beside it. Bremen's anti-aircraft defenses opened fire as the formations approached. Black bursts of flak filled the sky. The bombers could not maneuver, they had to fly straight and level for the bomb run. Shrapnel tore through wings and fuselages. Moran watched a B-17 in the formation ahead take a direct hit. It folded in half and dropped from the sky. Tikitavi released its bombs over the target. 4,000 pounds of high explosives tumbling toward the factories below. Mission accomplished. Now, they just had to survive the flight home. The bomber formation began its turn toward England, 200 miles of hostile airspace between them and safety. That was when Tikitavi's No. 2 engine took a direct hit from flak. The propeller windmilled uselessly. The aircraft began losing speed. Damaged bomber falling behind the formation was a death sentence. German fighter pilots watched for stragglers. A lone B-17 without the protection of massed defensive fire was easy prey. Moran saw them coming. A dozen Messerschmitts climbing from below, another group of Focke-Wulfs diving from above. Tikitavi was about to fight alone against overwhelming odds. And in the tail gunner position, Eugene Moran would be their first target. The first Messerschmitts came from the 6 o'clock low position, directly behind and beneath the bomber. Moran pressed his shoulders against the steel chest plate behind him and squeezed the triggers. His twin. .50 calibers roared to life. Tracer rounds streaked the fighter. The German pilot broke off his attack and rolled away. But there were many more. The wolves attacked in pairs. One drew Moran's attention while the other lined up a killing shot. Moran swung his guns from target to target, spent brass casings piled up around his knees. The smell of cordite filled the cramped compartment. At 24,000 feet, the temperature inside Ricky Tikitavi was 43 below zero. Moran wore an electrically heated flight suit, but the cold still seeped through. His breath formed ice crystals on his oxygen mask. The machine guns grew hot from continuous firing while his fingers went numb inside his gloves. The German pilots were professionals, Luftwaffe veterans who had been fighting since 1939. They knew exactly how to kill a B-17. Target the engines first to isolate the bomber, then eliminate the gunners. Finally, pour cannon rounds into the fuselage until something vital broke. Moran heard the impacts before he felt them, 20mm cannon shells punching through aluminum. The sound of tearing metal. Somewhere forward, one of the waist gunners stopped firing, then the other. The intercom filled with static and fragments of voices. Moran could not tell who was speaking or what they were saying. The bomber shuddered as more rounds struck home, kept firing. There was nothing else he could do. A Focke-Wulf came in from the 4 o'clock position. Moran swung his guns and pressed the triggers. The fighter's wing disintegrated, spiraled downward, trailing black smoke. His first confirmed kill. He did not have time to celebrate. Cannon rounds ripped through the tail section. Moran felt something slam into his left forearm, then his right. Both arms had been hit. Blood soaked through his flight suit sleeves. The pain was immediate and intense, but his hands still worked. He could still grip the triggers. More impacts followed. The vertical stabilizer above him took multiple hits. Control cables snapped and whipped through the air. The tail section began vibrating violently. Something was very wrong with the aircraft. Moran glanced down at his parachute. Every airman wore one. The silk canopy packed into a canvas container strapped to his chest. If the bomber went down, the parachute was his only chance of survival. Saw holes in the fabric. Multiple holes. Cannon rounds had shredded it. His parachute was useless. If he had to bail out, he would fall for miles to his death. The attack continued. German fighters made pass after pass. Moran counted at least 15 of them circling the crippled bomber. Ricky Tikitavi was bleeding altitude and speed. The remaining engines strained to keep the aircraft airborne. Forward in the nose section, navigator Jesse Orison was still alive. He had been wounded but remained conscious. The pilot and co-pilot were both dead at the controls. The flight engineer was dead in his turret. The radio operator was dead. The ball turret gunner was dead. The waist gunners were dead. Of the 10 men who had taken off from England that morning, only 2 were still breathing, Orison in the nose, Moran in the tail. 40 feet of shattered fuselage separated them. Another cannon round struck the bomber. This one hit something critical. Moran felt the aircraft lurch. A grinding sound echoed through the airframe. Vibration intensified until his teeth rattled. Then came a sound he would never forget. The shriek of tearing aluminum, the scream of structural failure. Ricky Tikitavi was breaking apart. The fuselage split just forward of the tail section. Moran watched the front of the aircraft separate and fall away. The wings, the engines, the cockpit, the bodies of his crewmates, all of it tumbling toward the German countryside for miles below. Eugene Moran was now alone, trapped in the severed tail section of Ricky Tikitavi, hurtling toward the frozen German countryside for miles below. The laws of physics offered no mercy. Terminal velocity for a human body is approximately 120 miles per hour, but the tail section, weighing several thousand pounds, fell faster. Moran had perhaps 90 seconds to live. The fuselage tumbled end over end, throwing him against the steel walls of his compartment. Blood sprayed across the interior. His arms screamed in pain. His parachute was destroyed. Yet, against all reason, he continued firing at the circling German fighters. Tracers arced wildly through the sky as Moran's twin. 50 caliber guns roared. German pilots, astonished, scattered in disbelief, had never seen anything like it. A man in a falling coffin firing back at them. One Messerschmitt took hits across its fuselage and spiraled toward the ground. The tail section stabilizers acted like crude wings, slowing the descent. Instead of plummeting straight down, the wreckage began to glide. The spinning slowed, offering Moran precious seconds. Fields, forests, roads, and towns rushed up to meet him. Bracing against the chest plate, he gripped the ammunition boxes with his broken arms. At approximately 100 miles per hour, the tail section struck the top of a pine tree. The impact snapped branches as thick as a man's arm. The vertical stabilizer caught a trunk and tore away. The wreckage cartwheeled through the forest canopy, shedding aluminum pieces with every bounce. Moran's head slammed against the steel frame. His vision exploded into white light. His ribs cracked. Both arms bent at unnatural angles. Yet when the tail section finally crashed to the frozen ground, Eugene Moran was alive. He lay in the snow, unable to move. Both forearms were shattered, ribs broken, and a section of skull torn away. The crash site was near Syke, 15 miles south of Bremen, deep in enemy territory. German soldiers, alerted by the bomber's destruction, arrived. They found him bloodied and barely conscious. His dog tags revealed his identity. Though severely wounded, Moran was transported without blankets, medical care, or warmth to a German military facility. Infection and hypothermia threatened his life. For 2 days, he lay on a cold concrete floor, his injuries worsening. Exposed brain tissue swelled. His arms turned purple and black. Without surgery or antibiotics, death seemed certain. The German guards watched, indifferent or uncertain, unable to provide proper care. On the 3rd day, he was transferred to a POW hospital, a converted building for wounded Allied airmen. Resources were scarce. The hospital relied on captured Serbian doctors from the Eastern Front. These doctors examined Moran and decided to act. With almost no anesthesia, crude instruments, and minimal supplies, they performed a 7-hour surgery. They set his broken bones using metal pins and wire, cleaned infected tissue from his skull, and attached a metal plate to protect his brain. Wooden boards splinted his arms. Bandages torn from sheets covered the wounds. Moran drifted in and out of consciousness, screaming in pain, delirious, reliving the crash over and over. The fever that followed climbed to 104. His body shook violently. The doctors could do no more. Survival now depended entirely on Moran's will. Over the next 72 hours, his body began fighting infection, healing bones, and stabilizing his brain. The Serbian doctors monitored him as best they could, pressing cold cloths to his burning forehead, offering whispered encouragement. By the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Signs of recovery appeared. Moran's body had won a battle medicine could barely fight. Moran passed away on March 23, 2014, at the age of 89. 7 decades had passed since the day German flak cut his bomber in half. Since he fired his machine guns while the world spun around him, since Serbian doctors saved his life with crude tools and extraordinary skill. His obituary quoted his philosophy, "I would rather wear out than rust out." Eugene Moran had refused to surrender to the Germans, to his injuries, or to fate itself. Only 3 Allied airmen in World War II survived falls from comparable distances without parachutes. Eugene Moran was one of them. The tail gunner's position had been the loneliest on a B-17, separated from the crew, first to be targeted, last to know if the bomber would survive. Yet he had occupied it with courage and determination, kept shooting all the way down. Moran's life story is a testament to human endurance, courage, and the power of will. From a farm boy in Wisconsin to a legend of aerial combat, from the skies over Bremen to freezing POW camps and the Black March. His survival was not luck, it was determination, skill, and unyielding spirit. His story reminds the world that real heroism comes in ordinary people, refusing to give in, refusing to surrender, and continuing to fight when all seems lost. Even decades after the war, Eugene Moran's story continues to inspire. Schools, historians, and local communities remember him. He demonstrated that survival against impossible odds is possible, that courage can exist in the loneliest of places, and that human spirit can outlast war, suffering, and death itself. Moran's legacy lives on, not just in records and awards, but in the memory of what it means to endure. The tail gunner who fell for miles without a parachute, the young man who refused to surrender, and the American who returned home to build a life despite scars seen and unseen, this was Eugene Moran.